Hello, this webinar is titled The Pilgrim Story, the life, witness, and impact they had in Holland. Let's pick up the story where they were leaving the British coast, the men on a ship, and they were on their way to Holland, normally a 3-day journey across the North Sea. This particular journey was long and violent, however, and took 14 days. Bradford described it in his diary in this fashion. They endured a fearful storm at sea, and it was 14 days or more before they reached port, in 7 of which they saw neither sun, moon, nor stars being driven near the coast of Norway. The sailors themselves often despaired, and once with shrieks and cries gave over all, as if the ship had foundered and they were sinking without hope of recovery. And yet they shouted in prayer, "Yet, Lord, thou canst save, yet, Lord, thou canst save," upon which the ship not only righted herself, but shortly afterwards the violence of the storm began to abate. Hundreds of ships and boats were lost in this storm, and when they came to port, the people came flocking, astonished at their deliverance, the storm having been so long and violent. And so one way that there was a witness of the Pilgrim's life there is the people were just amazed that they came through on the ship, and it spoke to some kind of special providence and protection on their lives that they made it through. And so they now had arrived in Amsterdam. Now we move to a point that they began to need to make an economic income and how they would accomplish that. And this is interesting, their view of poverty and its ability to destroy liberty. Being now come into the Low Countries, that is Holland, it was not long before they saw the grim and grisly face of poverty coming upon them like an armed man, with whom they must buckle. And this word buckle is a word from that period which means prepare for action, i.e. like buckling on armor. So with whom they must buckle and encounter, and from whom they could not fly. And so it's interesting how they look at poverty as an enemy that needed to be overcome, and that they could take action to do that. But they were armed with faith and patience against him and all his encounters. Lacking skills in the seafaring trades which Amsterdam enjoys, it was not so favorable in providing a means of livelihood. But being settled here, they fell to such trades and employments as they best could, valuing peace and their spiritual comfort above any other riches whatever. And at length they came to raise a competent and comfortable living, though only by dint of hard and continual labor. And so the Protestant work ethic, or the Puritan work ethic, is exhibited here, even as they entered the country of Holland and having to enter a whole new economy where their job set and skill set could not be applied. And what a valuable lesson for us today, to persevere, to view poverty as an enemy, and to make it our efforts to arm up and overcome. Now by this time, the women and children that had been left on the British Isles had been sent at England's expense to Amsterdam because the police could no longer care for them in their present conditions, and the king knew that the people would be outraged if he mistreated the women and children, so they were just sent on to join the men. They ended up leaving Amsterdam and moving southward to a Dutch community called Leyden, where they lived for a decade or more, and their witness and their character began to show up. And I'm going to take a look at 3 aspects of that. Their integrity. This is what Bradford said in his journal. First, though many of them were poor, there were none so poor but that if they were known to be of that congregation, in other words, of the Pilgrims' congregation, the Dutch, either bakers or others, would trust them to any reasonable extent when they lacked the money to buy what they needed. They found by experience how careful they were to keep their word. And so this economic principle of integrity and how the Pilgrims showed that out in a foreign country they were living in. Nextly, excellence. They saw how diligent they were in their callings, that they would even compete for their custom or business and employ them in preference to others. And so the Pilgrims exhibited economic excellence in their hard work. And so they actually became the vendors of choice for the Dutch people. Thirdly, their public witness. The magistrates of the city gave this commendable testimony of them in the public place of justice and reproof to the Wallons, who were of the French church that were there. And this is what the public officials said. "These English," said they, "have lived among us these 12 years, and yet we never had any suit or accusation against any of them. But your strifes and quarrels are continual." And so the Pilgrims again were lifted up as a model of citizens in that society. Lastly, when God had stirred the hearts of the Pilgrims to begin considering coming to the New World, The city magistrates came forward and business leaders and said this: "Indeed, when there was talk of their departure to America, several men of prominence in the country tried to induce them to become naturalized and even made them large offers to do so. But they had a bigger vision. They had religious freedom in Holland. They had lived there for 12 years. They were well respected, but they were facing cultural challenges, and they had a bigger vision that we had spoken about before in coming to America, and that is to apply the Scriptures to all of life, particularly these 4 individual areas that they felt like God dispensed His authority for believers to live out in community together." When they were ready to depart, they had a day of solemn prayer and humiliation together. That night there was little sleep for most of them, for it was spent in friendly entertainment and Christian discourse and other real expressions of true Christian love. Again, reading from Bradford's journal. The next day, what sighs and sobs and prayers rose from amongst them. What tears gushed from every eye, and pithy speeches pierced each heart. You see, there was only 100 pilgrims going forth out of a congregation of 350 or so. And so there was this real sense that many of them would not see each other again. Many of the Dutch strangers who stood on the quay as spectators could not refrain from tears. Yet it was comfortable and sweet to see such lively and true expressions of dear and unfeigned love. Boy, to live in a community like that, isn't that what every person, every human longs for and desires? But the tide which stays for no man called them away. So they left that goodly pleasant city of Death's Haven, which had been their resting place near 12 years. But they knew they were pilgrims, and looked not much on those things, but lifted up their eyes to the heavens, their dearest country, and quieted their spirits. This is the Pilgrim's Impact, life witness and impact in Holland. It touches my life and heart. I hope it touches yours as well. My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.